Thank you so much for that introduction. So thank you guys all so much also for coming here today, especially so early in the morning. And I'm going to be talking to you guys today about depression. So just show of hands, how many people in the room know someone who has depression? All right, look around. Almost everyone in this room has been touched by depression. If I had asked you how many people in this room have depression, about 20% would have raised your hand, including me. And if I asked how many of you had been treated for depression successfully, only about half of those would be able to put their hands down. Think what that means. Half of people with depression do not get successful treatment. So I was really lucky. Prozac worked great for me. It completely transformed my life. It's part of why I went into neuroscience. I wanted to understand what depression is, and I also wanted to help the people who weren't so lucky. And this really hit home for me when I was at a scientific conference. And some news outlets picked up my work and put it out there. And I came back to my room, and I had about 100 emails from patients with treatment-resistant depression. And some of them just wanted to say thank you for doing the research. Some of them wanted more information. But some of them wanted to volunteer their services as human guinea pigs for my research. And I was working in mice. I mean, think how desperate you have to be to offer yourself up that way. And at that moment, I realized I needed more than just some academic understanding of what causes depression. I needed to come up with real treatments for real people. So what is it about my research that I think I can help these people? Well, I think this is how we think about depression, right? We think of this as a disorder of the brain. And I'm here to tell you today that depression is a disease of the whole body. And what I particularly study are these cytokines. And these are signaling cells. These are signaling between immune cells, right? And they're really symbolized by this guy up here, this gentleman. And what ends up happening is that they can be released from your white blood cells. And normally they're released from your white blood cells when you're sick. But if too many of them are released, they get into your brain and they make you depressed. Think about how you feel when you're sick. You're lethargic, you don't want to eat, you don't want to see anyone, you don't want to take care of yourself, you don't want to go anywhere, and of course you don't, you're sick. But you also feel that way when you're depressed. Now, as I just said, when you're sick, those feelings are caused by these cytokines, and they're being released from your white blood cells so they can go out there and they can attack that bacteria or that virus that's invading your body. But when you're depressed, what's the trigger? What can they attack, right? Well, what usually causes an episode of depression is stress. And so what I think is happening is that your body is being triggered by this stress, and it thinks it's more dangerous to you than it really is. So it's mounting this huge immune response. And that made me think of another occasion when your body mounts a huge immune response to something that's not really dangerous to you. And those are allergies, right? So what happens when you have an allergy is that pollen gets in your nose or you get a bee sting, and your body thinks that it's dangerous. So it mounts an immune response and it attacks it. But you also make memory cells. So now, the next time you're exposed to it, it's going to mount an even bigger response, even faster. And I think that's what's happening in some patients with depression, that they are having an allergy to stress. So how can we help them? So my research has looked into ways of blocking these cytokines from getting into the brain and turning it into a normal brain. Right? And so that's what I've been trying to do, is to really treat depression in the periphery. And so what we can do, and the reason I want to treat depression in the periphery, is it's a lot easier to target. You know, if you are trying to get something into the brain, you're blocked by this blood-brain barrier here. It's not going to let anything into your brain unless it's really, really small. But it's really easy to target the immune system. Their job is to move around your body, in your blood, and eat things that aren't supposed to be there. So it's a great way to deliver a drug. Also, when we've researched depression in animal models, one of the things we find is that compounds don't act the same in every single region of your brain, nor do they act the same in every cell in your brain. So that means we have to make stuff region and cell type specific, and that's really hard to do in the brain unless you're actually infusing something directly in there, into that region. But it's a lot easier to make something cell type specific in the immune system. And finally, I want to share with you some of the research I've done recently at Virginia Tech. And what we were looking at were human patients who had depression or were healthy controls. So here are my healthy controls, my happy Hokie. And then I looked at the cytokine profiles of people who were depressed at the time, but they had previously responded to antidepressants. And what they found was they weren't really all that different. In fact, we didn't see any alterations in their cytokines compared to the healthy controls. But then when we looked at patients who were also depressed and were treatment resistant, we found they were overrun with cytokines. So it was everywhere in their blood, and they were different. So this guy here was even different from this patient who was also depressed, but had previously responded to antidepressants. And so what that means is we have the possibility of developing a blood test to tell if your depression will respond to antidepressants or not. But what does that do for the people who are treatment resistant, right? We still need to treat them. And so I've been really excited because my work in animals is now being translated into people. And we're using that compound that blocked cytokines from getting into the brain in patients who have depression to see if we can treat their depression, particularly in people who are treatment resistant. But the problem with that is that it works by suppressing their immune system, by dampening that. And what that means is that they're at a greater risk of getting sick. So in moving forward in my work at Virginia Tech, what I'm really interested in doing is getting into those immune cells. So figuring out which cells are releasing those cytokines, getting in there, and just tweaking them. So yeah, they'll respond if you get sick, but maybe they won't respond so much to stress. When I've talked about this research in the past, the thing that people always ask is, what can I do now to treat inflammation in my body? And I used to have to say, diet and exercise. And really, I'm not such a big fan of diet and exercise. I don't know, maybe you can help. But I'm really excited because I had a collaboration with the Passanetti lab at Mount Sinai, and we found something else that blocked inflammation in the body. And that's a metabolite of red wine and chocolate. And now that's a message I can get behind. So, I know you're all going to maybe drink a little beer today, but add some red wine and dark chocolate to that. So I hope today I convinced you that there is more to depression than just the brain, that you should expect in the future to be able to go into your doctor's office and get a blood test to tell you if you have depression, what kind, and what's the best course of treatment. And then I'm working together with other members of the College of Science and the School of Neuroscience to find new ways to treat depression by thinking outside the brain. So in closing, I just want to thank the various Hokies, past and present from my lab, who have contributed to this research. And thank you guys for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Well, I was really excited that we were building a School of Neuroscience here. So Harry Sontheimer started the School of Neuroscience about 3 years ago, really. And he brought me in 2 years ago, and I loved the energy. I loved the idea of building something from the ground up and really having control about what we were going to teach at a graduate level and what we were going to teach at an undergraduate level.
Is there a link between depression and autism?
So that's a great question. In females, there is a link. So in terms of the symptoms that we associate with autism, in males, they're usually more outward directed and behavioral, but a lot of times in females who have autism, you do see higher incidences of depression and anxiety. And in fact, a good friend of mine's daughter is about 6, and she's severely autistic. And one of the things they did with her recently was put her on SSRIs because she was getting so upset every time something didn't work the way she wanted it to. They didn't follow the pathways that she wanted, and it helped her immensely. So there definitely, I think, is a link, at least in some people.
Are you collaborating with Pregame?
Yes, we are, actually. So I've actually been working with the Department of Psychiatry, and I'm very interested in getting blood from patients and actually also from residents. So one of the things that we've been interested in is this idea of burnout and depression in residents, and whether we could find predictive markers in patients' blood to determine if they may be at greater risk of that based on these immune markers. That's a great question, and I'm not there yet, but I would love to. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting when you start looking at all of these cytokines that are circulating is that a lot of cases, bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, you see the same cytokines regulated over and over again. And that's why I'm trying to take this sort of wide approach, looking at a lot of different cytokines to figure out, okay, maybe a lot of these are regulated the same way by different disorders, but what's different? And that's really where I'm trying to go with it. All right. Thank you guys so much.